All right, future policymakers, welcome back. You know how it is. Got to stay on top of those current affairs for those UPSC mains essays, right?
Absolutely. And hey, who knows? Maybe you'll even grab some bonus points for the prelims along the way,
Oh,
right?
you got it. And speaking of prelims and mains, today we're diving deep into something with some serious implications for both India's pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, this is a sector that just keeps on growing.
It really does. And we're going to be pulling out some key insights from, you guessed it, the Financial Express. So get those notebooks ready
Oh.
because things are about to get interesting.
Oh, yeah, definitely. This is a sector that touches on so much economics, healthcare, even international relations. Really essential stuff for anyone who wants to be a civil servant, right?
No doubt about it. And to kick things off, let's start with a fact that might just surprise you.
All right, lay it on me.
The U.S., as big and powerful as it is, relies heavily on India for its medicine.
Seriously.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about a handful of pills here and there. India exports a massive $9 billion worth of pharmaceutical formulations to the U.S. every single year.
Wow, that's a huge chunk of change.
It is, and get this, that's about a third of India's total pharma exports.
That's going to have some major geopolitical implications, right?
You're already thinking like a policymaker.
Yeah.
That kind of dependence definitely raises questions.
Yeah, like what if those supply chains get disrupted? Or how does this impact trade deals, strategic partnerships, that sort of thing?
Exactly. Those are the kinds of connections you got to be making for those UPSC exams. All right, so we've established India's got a strong hold in the U.S. market.
For sure.
Now let's talk about this proposal that's been making waves. The Indian Pharmaceutical Alliance, IPA, they're pushing for zero customs duty on U.S. medicine imports.
Wait, really? Sounds a little counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does, but there's a strategy behind it.
Oh, I see. So what's the game plan?
Well, by saying, hey, no tariffs on your medicines, India is hoping to prevent the U.S. from slapping reciprocal tariffs on Indian pharmaceuticals.
Ah, so it's like a preemptive strike to protect their market share, keep that competitive edge. Clever.
Totally. It's like a chess match, right?
Yeah.
Always got to be thinking a few moves ahead. And this actually leads us right into another hot-button issue.
Oh,
The U.S. has been pushing India to amend its Patents Act of 1970, specifically Section 3D. That's become a bit of a sticking point between the two countries.
okay. So break that down for me. What's this Section 3 all about?
Well, think of it this way. Sometimes companies, right before their patent runs out, they make like a teeny tiny change to a drug's formula.
Yeah, okay. I've heard of that.
And that lets them extend their monopoly, block those cheaper generics from entering the market.
Right. Evergreening, they call it.
Exactly. And Section 3, that's designed to prevent this whole evergreening thing and ensure people have access to affordable meds.
So it's like a clash of priorities, right? The U.S. wants stronger patent protection, saying it drives innovation.
And India's focusing on keeping healthcare affordable for its huge population. Classic dilemma for policymakers: how to balance economic interests with public health needs. Textbook UPSC material right there.
It really is, and it highlights how what happens on the domestic front can have global ripples.
For sure, the outcome of this debate could impact access to medicine, healthcare costs all over the world. Now let's zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture here.
Sounds good.
India's pharmaceutical industry, it's a powerhouse, ranks third globally in production volume and 14th in value.
And they're not just churning out pills. India supplies over 50% of global vaccine demand.
Wow, that's impressive.
And get this, they're responsible for a whopping 40% of generic medicines in the U.S.
Okay, those are some serious stats.
It's not just numbers, though. This shows how crucial a role India plays in global health security.
Right, and speaking of big numbers, let's not forget the economic impact. This industry is valued at a massive 50 billion US dollars.
Yeah, and that's almost 2% of India's GDP. And the projections, even more impressive.
Let me guess, it's going up.
Way up. They're aiming for a whopping 130 billion by 2030.
That's a lot of zeros.
And there's another exciting development in the works.
Oh, what's that?
India's biotechnology sector, it's booming too. Projected to hit an incredible 300 billion US dollars by 2030. India's on track to be a global leader in healthcare innovation.
So we've got this thriving industry making a huge impact both domestically and globally. But what's driving this success? What's the secret sauce here?
Well, one of the biggest advantages is cost effectiveness. Indian pharmaceuticals are often significantly cheaper than their Western counterparts.
Makes them accessible to a much wider population, both in India and around the world?
Exactly, and that's huge, especially with healthcare costs going through the roof everywhere.
Absolutely, but it's not just about the price tag, right?
No, not at all. India's got some serious government support, too.
Like what?
Initiatives like the Production-Linked Incentive Scheme, for example. It encourages domestic manufacturing and boosts competitiveness.
Shows how government policies can really shape an entire industry, right?
Absolutely. And let's not forget about India's R&D capabilities. They've got a huge pool of skilled scientists and engineers.
I'm impressed.
In fact, India is now ranked 6th globally in patent applications. Shows their commitment to innovation.
You know, it makes me wonder, has India always been this big on pharmaceutical research? Or is this a newer development?
That's a great question, and it actually leads us perfectly into understanding how India's pharmaceutical landscape has evolved over time. But before we get there, let's zoom out again. Consider the global context.
Okay, so how does the global healthcare scene play into India's pharmaceutical rise?
Well, the world's facing some big healthcare challenges, right? Chronic diseases are on the rise, and the population's aging. That means a surge in demand for medicines, and they need to be affordable and accessible. India is in a prime position to meet that global need.
So it's a mix of internal strengths and a favorable global situation that's propelled India's pharmaceutical industry to the front. But it's not just about domestic success, right? Exports play a huge role here.
Huge is an understatement. India's pharmaceuticals reach over 200 nations.
Wow, that's a lot of countries.
And exports hit a remarkable $27.82 billion in fiscal year 2024. That makes India the 12th largest exporter of medical goods globally.
Pretty impressive. And what's fueling this growth? Is it mainly generic medicines or are there other factors?
Generics are definitely a big part of it, but India is moving towards higher value products too. Biosimilars, for example, those are similar to already approved biologic medicines, but they're much more affordable.
Oh, I've heard about those.
They're in high demand, and India is a major player there. They're also getting into specialty drugs, targeting specific complex diseases.
So it's not just about producing affordable meds in bulk. It's about becoming a leader in those specialized areas too. Smart move for long-term growth, global leadership. But even with all this success, there must be some challenges along the way, right? I mean, every industry has its hurdles.
You're absolutely right, and those challenges are particularly important for you as UPSC aspirants to understand. Analyzing those hurdles and thinking critically about potential solutions is what makes you stand out in those essay questions.
Okay, good point. So let's shift gears and talk about some of these challenges. What are the main hurdles that India's pharmaceutical industry needs to overcome to keep this impressive growth going?
Well, one of the biggest, I'd say, is quality control.
Ah, right. We can't forget about that.
Definitely not. Incidents like those tragic cough syrup deaths in Gambia back in 2022, those raised serious concerns.
They did, about the consistency and reliability of some of the pharmaceutical products coming from India.
Yeah, it's a harsh reminder that safety and efficacy, those got to be top priorities, especially when you're talking about medicine.
Absolutely. Those kinds of incidents, they not only have a devastating human cost, but they also damage India's reputation on the global stage.
Yeah.
Makes people think twice about relying on them as a supplier.
You're right. It really underscores how crucial it is to have stricter regulations and really solid quality assurance measures in place. And, across the entire supply chain.
Right, from start to finish.
Yeah.
But, all that regulatory compliance stuff, that can be a real headache for companies.
Oh, for sure. Especially for those smaller players, it can be really costly and time-consuming.
So it's a tricky balancing act, isn't it? Making sure the quality's there without stifling the industry's growth. Sounds like a real policy challenge, something our UPSC folks would need to grapple with.
You got it. Another big one to consider is that reliance on imports, particularly for active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs.
APIs.
India imports a big chunk of those, mostly from China.
Wait a minute, hold on. This is ringing a bell. Isn't that reliance on China a bit of a risk, especially given those geopolitical tensions we talked about earlier?
You're sharp. That's exactly right. It's a big vulnerability. Any kind of disruption in the supply chain, whether it's political, a natural disaster, or even another pandemic, that could seriously impact India's ability to produce medicine.
So boosting domestic API manufacturing, that becomes even more crucial. But how do they actually achieve that? That sounds like a pretty tall order.
It's a challenge, no doubt, but it's not impossible. The government's already taking steps, trying to incentivize domestic API production. Things like PLI 2.0 and those bulk drug parks they're developing, those are aimed at attracting investment and boosting domestic manufacturing capacity.
So it's about creating a more favorable environment at home for producing those APIs.
Yeah.
Reducing that reliance on external sources, making that supply chain more resilient.
Exactly.
Okay, so what other challenges are there?
Well, pricing pressure is another one. India is known for affordable medicines, but the National List of Essential Medicines, NLM, they set price caps on essential drugs. And that can hit profitability, make companies less likely to invest in developing new drugs.
Yeah, I see the issue. It's that classic tension, isn't it? You want medicines to be affordable, accessible to everyone.
Right. But you also need to make sure companies have a reason to keep innovating, researching, and developing new and better drugs.
It's finding that sweet spot, isn't it? Where affordability and innovation can work together. That's a tough one for policymakers to solve.
For sure. And these aren't just internal challenges India needs to worry about. The global pharmaceutical scene, it's getting more competitive all the time.
Oh yeah, we touched on that earlier. So it's not just about holding on to their current position. They've got to stay ahead of the curve as new players enter the market and existing ones step up their game.
You got it. China, for example, they're pouring money into their pharmaceutical industry, want to be a global leader in innovation. And the US and the EU, they're still major players with all their research infrastructure and advanced manufacturing.
And then you've got new manufacturing hubs emerging. Places like Vietnam and Indonesia getting in on the action makes that global pharmaceutical market even more dynamic, more challenging for India.
It's a complex landscape, for sure. But with challenges come opportunities. And that's what makes this sector so fascinating. As future policymakers, you'll be right in the thick of it, navigating those complexities, figuring out solutions that benefit India and the whole global community.
All right, so we've laid out the challenges. Now, let's put on those problem-solving hats. What are some strategies, some solutions that India could pursue to overcome these hurdles and maintain its top spot in the global pharmaceutical arena?
Well, we've talked about reducing that reliance on API imports, right?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Definitely. Strengthening domestic manufacturing, those initiatives like PLI 2.0 and the bulk drug parks, those are a good starting point. But it can't just be about quantity.
You're right, quality has to be a top priority too.
Absolutely. Making sure they meet international standards, streamlining those regulatory processes so companies can actually keep up.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
That's going to not only improve safety, but also make India more credible in the global market.
Exactly. And, they could think bigger, go beyond just generics.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean?
India has the potential to be a real hub for innovation in those high-value drug markets. Things like gene therapies, personalized medicine, even mRNA vaccines.
Now, those are some game changers.
They really are, and those areas have huge growth potential. Plus, India already has a solid foundation in biotechnology and research.
So it's like moving up the ladder, right?
Yeah.
Going from being known for affordable generics to pioneering those cutting-edge therapies. That would be a huge shift for the industry and for India's global standing.
It would be massive. But to get there, they need to put a lot of effort into incentivizing research and development. That means creating policies that make it attractive for companies, providing tax breaks, research grants, fostering those partnerships between universities, industry, and government research institutions.
It's a multi-pronged approach, isn't it? Boost domestic production, get into those high-value markets, and really ramp up R&D. And of course, tackle those quality control issues head-on.
Exactly right. India needs to show the world they're serious about quality, about transparent regulations. That's how they'll build trust with consumers, with international partners, and attract more foreign investment.
All of that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious about something. Are there specific regions or markets that India should be focusing on for export growth? I mean, they're already exporting to over 200 countries, so where do they go from there?
That's a great question. Well, they already have a wide reach, but there's always room for strategic expansion. Those emerging markets, places like Africa, Latin America, the ASEAN region, those offer some big opportunities. Those are regions with growing healthcare needs and a rising middle class with more spending power.
So it's about figuring out where India's strengths really line up with the needs of those regions, right? I mean, they've got affordability, expertise in generics and biosimilars, and that growing portfolio of specialty drugs.
Exactly. And this is where you, as future policymakers, come in. You'll need to understand those market dynamics, analyze trade agreements, and figure out how to overcome those trade barriers. That's how you expand India's pharmaceutical footprint globally.
This has been a really insightful deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from market dynamics and global trends to the challenges and opportunities facing India's pharmaceutical industry. It's a sector with huge implications for India's economy, its healthcare system, and its global standing.
And don't forget, all this great information comes from the Financial Express. Great source for economic and business news. Definitely encourage you to check out their reporting for a deeper understanding.
For sure. And if you found this deep dive helpful, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop your questions in the comments below. We're here to support you every step of the way on your UPSC journey.
Absolutely. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Keep those ambitions soaring.